Chapter 18. The Prayer of Union. May the Lord give me the right words to explain the fourth spiritual water. I need His help now more than ever. In the previous state of prayer, the soul dies to the things of this world. Yet she can tell that she is not dead altogether. She still has her senses, so she feels her profound aloneness. She makes use of external things to express what she feels, even if they are only symbolic. In every degree of prayer I have described so far, the soul gardener is working. In the more advanced stages, the soul receives so much comfort and delight that she would never want to abandon the cultivation of prayer. So she experiences her labor as glory rather than as toil. In this new state, the ordinary senses are transcended. The soul rejoices without understanding what she's rejoicing in. She recognizes that she is enjoying a good thing, one that encompasses all good things within it, but the goodness defies comprehension. The senses are so occupied with this joy that they are not free to experience anything else, either exterior or interior. In the early stages of prayer, the senses are allowed to give some indication of the tremendous joy they feel. But in the fourth water, the soul's joy is incomparably greater. Yet she is much less capable of expressing it. Both the body and the soul are drained of the power to communicate. At a time like this, anything is perceived as a disturbance, a torment, and an obstacle to the soul's repose. The faculties are all drawn into union. Even if the soul wanted to, she would be unable to convey her delight. If she were able to describe it, she would not be in a state of union. I don't know how to explain this prayer they call union or how it happens. Mystical theologians elucidate it, but I don't know the proper vocabulary. I don't understand what mind is or how it is different from the soul or spirit. It all seems like the same thing to me. I do see that the soul sometimes shoots out of itself like a flame leaping from a blazing fire. You, with all your learning, will understand how the fire and the flame are the same. I don't know how else to say it. I want to talk about how the soul feels when she is in this divine union. We already know what union means. Two separate things become one. Oh, my beloved, you are so good. May you be blessed forever. May all things praise you, my God. You have loved us so much that we are truly able to speak of communion between you and our souls here in our exile. This proves your boundless generosity and magnanimity, even in the case of souls who are already good. This abundance is who you are, my Lord. You give according to your nature. Oh, infinite bounty! Your works are magnificent. Even those of us who are not intellectually engaged with the things of the world find ourselves incapable of understanding divine truths. My intellect stops dead in its tracks when it ponders how you have bestowed such exalted blessings on souls who have offended you so much. I start to think about it, and I can't continue. Where could the intellect possibly go that would not be a backward motion? I cannot find the words to thank you for such precious favors. So I sometimes take comfort in uttering nonsense. In the midst of receiving these divine favors, the soul is powerless to speak. But right after God has blessed me in this way, or else just as He was beginning, I often used to say, Lord, look what you're doing. How quickly you seem to forget my wickedness. Obviously you have forgotten. How else could you have forgiven me? Well, I beg you now to remember it and to place some limits on your mercies. Oh, my Creator, please don't pour such precious liquid into such a broken cup. You have already seen how I tend to spill it. Do not put a treasure like this in a place where the craving for worldly pleasures is not as deadened as it ought to be. Otherwise, you will only squander it. How could you entrust this fortified city and hand over its keys to such a cowardly defender. The minute the enemy attacks, she flings open the gates and lets him in. Do not let your love be so great, O eternal King, that you would jeopardize such priceless jewels. When you place your treasure in the power of such a lowly, wretched, weak, and unworthy creature, gives her the excuse to undervalue it. She may well strive to keep it safe, with your grace, of course, and being what she is, she requires more help than most. But she is incapable of making use of the treasure to be of service to anyone else. Why not? She is a woman. She's not even a good woman, but a worthless one. It seems that whatever talent you have given her is wasted by being not only hidden, but actually buried deep in such vile earth. You do not generally bestow such great blessings as these on someone incapable of benefiting many other souls. I have begged you in the past, my God, and I will continue to beseech you with all my heart to grant these blessings to someone who will make better use of them than I for the magnification of your glory. You already know that I would consider it a blessing to lose the greatest good that can be obtained on earth, if it meant you would do this. It occurred to me to say things like this, as well as other things, to God. That was until I saw how foolish I was being. What a lack of humility! The Lord knows perfectly well what is right for me. He knows that my soul would not have the strength to become liberated unless His Majesty instilled it in me through His divine blessings. Well, then what are the effects that grace leaves in the soul? Can the soul do anything on her own to lift herself to such a high station? If so, what might that be? Let's take a look at this. Heavenly love elevates the spirit in union, but elevation and union are two different things. To those who may not have experienced this raising of the spirit, this may seem like a false distinction. Even though the two realities are ultimately one, the Lord works a little differently in each case. With the flight of the spirit, the soul experiences greater detachment from worldly things. In my experience, this lifting up of the spirit is a special mercy. I will admit that it looks almost exactly like union. A little fire is just as much fire as a big one. Yet it takes a long time for a bit of iron to grow red hot in a small flame. In a big fire, the substance of even a large chunk of iron appears to be transformed quickly. This seems to me to be an example of how these two divine favors are different from one another. Anyone who has experienced raptures will understand this perfectly. To someone who has not had such an experience, I'm sure my explanation must sound like nonsense. It is a bit ridiculous for someone like me to try and explain something that cannot possibly be put into words. But I have to believe that the Lord is with me here. His Majesty knows that although I have been commanded to write this and am compelled by my vows to obey, my primary motivation is to draw souls into the experience of sublime grace. I would not attempt to speak of things that I have not been through. In fact, this last spiritual water is so hard to explain that when I started to write about it, I was afraid it was going to come out sounding like Greek. So I put down my quill and went to communion. Blessed be the Lord who bestows His mercy on the ignorant. What great things come through the simple virtue of obedience. Just as He did with this previous spiritual waters, God Himself illuminated my intellect about this one, giving me just the words I need to explain this divine favor and showing me exactly how to use them. It seems that His Majesty is willing to say for me what I can neither say nor even understand myself. I am telling the whole truth here. So whatever is good is His own teaching. What is bad comes from that sea of wickedness I call myself. There must be many souls who have attained the heights of prayer that the Lord in His mercy has granted to this miserable creature. If such souls are afraid they may have lost their way and want to consult me about it, they can rest secure in the knowledge that the Lord is helping His servants show them the true way. The fourth heavenly water is so abundant that when it falls, it saturates the whole garden. If the Beloved were to send this rain every time the ground became a little dry, the gardener wouldn't have much to do, would she? And if there were no such thing as winter and the weather were always mild, there would be no shortage of flowers and fruit, would there? Obviously, under such circumstances, the gardener would be thrilled. But as long as we're living on earth, this is impossible. When one water fails, we need to seek ways to obtain another. This water from heaven often comes when the gardener least expects it. Yet it is true that in the beginning stages of the spiritual path, the heavenly rain almost always falls after a long period of contemplative prayer. Between successive stages of prayer, the Lord lifts the small bird of the soul and places her in the divine nest to rest. He has watched her flying around for such a long time, striving with all her might to see God and serve Him. She has strained her intellect and pushed her will. He wants to reward her for her hard work, even in this lifetime. And what a reward! A single moment of that grace is more than enough to pay the soul back for all the trials she could ever endure in this life. While the soul is seeking God in this way, she finds herself slipping into a kind of swoon. With a rush of gentle joy, she feels everything begin to fade away. The breath and bodily powers progressively dwindle. It takes tremendous effort just to wiggle the fingers. The eyes close of their own accord. Even if a person in this state were able to keep her eyes open, she wouldn't see a thing. She cannot read or sound out words. She can barely recognize letters. If she wanted to read, the intellect would offer no help in turning the alphabet into comprehensible language. She can hear, but she does not understand what she's hearing. The senses do not serve the soul one iota in this state. In fact, there is the danger that they will do her harm by diminishing her sublime pleasure. It is useless for her to try to speak. Even if she could form a word, she lacks the energy to pronounce it. As the power of the body decreases, the strength of the soul increases, compounding the enjoyment of her glory. She experiences a vast and palpable delight. No matter how long it lasts, this prayer causes no harm. At least, it has never caused me any. In fact, even if I had been ill before the Lord granted me this mercy, I always felt much better afterward. What harm could such a blessing possibly do? The external effects are so obvious. Who could doubt that a great thing has happened to the soul? What else besides grace could rob us of our bodily strength, fill us with joy, and then revitalize our physical powers? It is true that in the beginning this state of prayer passes so quickly, it did in my case anyway, that the shutting down of the senses and other outward signs are almost imperceptible. But the soul has no trouble recognizing that the sun must have shone with dazzling intensity since it melted her away. It should be noted that even the longest period of time the soul remains in this suspended state is actually very short. If the faculties were suspended for half an hour, that would be a long time. I don't think it has ever lasted that long for me. Of course, since there is no sensory awareness in this state, it's hard to know what's going on. But I do know that very soon one faculty or another recovers and the prayer passes. The will remains captive in the divine web while the other two faculties escape and revert to their mischievous ways. The quietude of the will draws them into suspension again and again, but they always come back to life very quickly. Some people end up spending many hours of prayer in this way. Once the faculties have tasted this wine and become intoxicated, they willingly lose themselves all over again just so they can drink some more. They join the company of the will, and all three celebrate together. Remember, this absorption of the faculties is over in a flash. But their return to ordinary functioning is not abrupt. In fact, They usually linger in a state of bemusement for several hours. Every now and then, God gathers them back to himself. We have come to the place where we need to try and say something about what the soul is feeling inside herself during this experience. Oh, if only I knew how to speak of this. We cannot understand it with our minds, let alone put it into language. I was reflecting on this after receiving communion and being swept up into the very state of prayer I was writing about. How was I going to describe what the soul goes through at this time? Then the Lord spoke to me. The soul utterly dissolves, my daughter, so that it can fully unite with me, he said. It is no longer the soul that lives, but I. Since she cannot comprehend what she understands by not understanding. What happens in this state is so rarefied that there's no way to explain it any more clearly than this. Only those who have tasted it will know anything of its flavor. All I can say is that the soul sees herself as one with God. There is an abiding sense of certainty that accompanies this encounter. The soul is incapable of doubting the truth of her union with him. The faculties are so radically suspended here that they completely fail to function. If a person in this state has been meditating on some scripture passage, it will vanish from his memory as if he had never been thinking of it at all. If he has been reading, he cannot concentrate or remember a thing he has just read, nor can he recall the words of prescribed prayers. And so the wings of this restless little moth we call the memory are singed, and it cannot flutter around anymore. The will is entirely absorbed in loving, but it doesn't understand how it loves. If the intellect understands anything, it can't understand how it understands. The mind can't understand what the soul knows. I don't think the intellect does understand because, as I've already said, it can't be understood. I really can't understand this myself. There was something I was ignorant about in the beginning. I didn't know that God was in everything. Even though he felt so near, I thought this was impossible. But because his presence was so clear to me, I couldn't stop believing that he was there. Certain uneducated men told me that God was only present by grace. I didn't believe them. His presence was so tangible. I was confused. A very learned man from the order of the glorious Saint Dominic liberated me from this prison of doubt. He reassured me that God was with me and told me all about how God communicates himself to the soul. This was deeply comforting to me. Just remember, this heavenly water, this magnificent gift from God, always leaves immense blessings in the soul. This is what I'd like to talk about next. Chapter 19. Divine Reign. The prayer of union leaves the soul in a state of great tenderness. She longs to be consumed and is overcome by the urge to weep, not in sorrow, but in joy. She suddenly finds herself bathed in tears without knowing when or how she shed them. She is delighted to discover that the same water that quenches the force of the fire makes it burn with even more intensity. This may sound like nonsense, but it happens. Sometimes in the beginning of my spiritual life, when the experience passed quickly, this prayer would transport me so far beyond myself that I would wonder whether I had been dreaming or if the glory I was feeling was a reality. But when I saw that I was drenched by a water that poured so powerfully and so quickly as if from a heavenly cloud, I realized that my experience was real. The soul is so filled with courage that she would consider it a blessing to be cut into 1,000 pieces for her God. This state of prayer triggers sweeping resolutions, heroic promises, and ardent desires. The soul clearly perceives the vanity of the world and begins to develop contempt for it. This prayer refines and elevates the soul far more than any degree of prayer so far. Her humility is deeper too, because she sees that she had absolutely nothing to do with the generous and magnificent gift she is being given, and that she is equally powerless to hold on to it. Her own unworthiness becomes painfully apparent, for cobwebs cannot hide when sunlight floods into a room. She is so far from conceited at this point that she cannot imagine that she ever suffered from false pride. Since the soul barely gave her consent for the blessed state she is in, she sees with her own eyes that she herself is capable of little or nothing. The door to the senses simply closed, and the soul was left to enjoy her Lord in private. Now that she is alone with him, what can she do but love him? It requires inordinate effort just to see and hear any external thing. Afterward, the soul's past life and God's great glory are revealed with perfect clarity. The intellect doesn't have to scavenge for this truth. There it is, fully cooked. All the soul needs to do is eat and understand. She realizes that she deserves to be chastised and that she is being punished with glory. She dissolves in praise of God, as I would gladly melt away right now. Blessed be you, O my beloved. You have taken the mud that I am and transfigured me into clear water for your own table. May you be praised, O joy of the angels. You have willingly raised up such a vile little worm. The soul continues to make progress. Now that she sees that the fruits are not her own, she begins to distribute them. The more she gives away, the less she seems to need. She is a soul who treasures God's gifts and also wants to share them with others. She begs God not to let her be the only wealthy one. Almost without knowing she is doing it, the soul begins to benefit her neighbors. The fragrance of her flowers has grown so sweet that other souls are attracted to her. They recognize her virtue and want to partake in the holy feast. Few souls reach this state without having suffered innumerable misunderstandings, criticisms, and illnesses. But these trials cultivate the soil of the soul. Detachment from self-interest softens the earth, allowing the water to penetrate it so thoroughly that it almost never becomes arid again. Yet if the ground of the soul is still hard and choked with thorns, as mine used to be, it will soon dry up. If she is not as grateful as she should be for such blessed gifts from God, and if she is still inclined to miss the mark, her garden will wither. If the gardener becomes careless, and the Lord in his mercy decides not to send the rain for a while, she might as well consider the garden lost. To my great amazement, this has happened to me. If I hadn't experienced it, I would scarcely believe it. I am writing this to console weak souls like myself, so that they will not despair and stop trusting in God's greatness. Even if they fall after the Lord has raised them up so high, they should not allow themselves to become so discouraged that they lose their way. Tears gain all things. One water draws down the other. This is one of the main things that motivated me to obey the order to write this account of my miserable life and the great mercy the Lord has granted me without my deserving it. Being what I am, I have repeatedly offended him. I wish I had real authority so that people would believe what I have to say. Please, Lord, give it to me now. I repeat, let no one who has cultivated the practice of contemplative prayer grow discouraged and say, if I end up reverting to my old ways, it would be better for me to give up prayer altogether. I believe things will get worse if the person abandons prayer and refuses to quit his bad habits. But if he stays the course, prayer will carry him into the harbor of light. This is exactly how the spirit of evil attacked me. As I have mentioned, I wasted precious time worrying that I lacked the humility necessary to be worthy of practicing prayer. And so, for a year and a half, I did not pray at all. Well, for at least a year anyway. I don't quite remember about the other 6 months. All I succeeded in doing was plunging myself into hell. I didn't need any devils to drag me there. Oh God, save me. What blindness! The spirit of evil is smart to lend its hand in this way, luring the soul away from prayer. The traitor knows that a soul who perseveres in prayer is lost to him. Thanks to the goodness of God, every time the spirit of evil trips such a soul and makes her fall, it is only helping her to leap up again even higher in service of the Lord. No wonder the spirit of evil is so concerned. Oh, my Jesus, what a sight it is to see you reach out your merciful hand and raise a soul who has fallen after she had already attained such an elevated state. Then she clearly perceives the multitude of your blessings and the depth of her own wretchedness. She acknowledges your vast power and dissolves into you. Here, she does not dare lift her eyes. Here, she lifts her eyes. She recognizes her tremendous debt to you. Here, she becomes devoted to the Queen of Heaven and begs her to intercede with you. Here, she invokes the help of the saints who also fell after you had already called them. Here, she considers herself unworthy of the very ground she walks on. She cannot believe she deserves all the blessings you have given her. Here she approaches the sacraments with living faith in the power that God has placed in them. She praises you because you have left a healing ointment for our wounds that not only soothes them, but completely eliminates them. The soul is amazed by all this. Who wouldn't be amazed, Lord of my soul, to witness so much mercy? How could anyone fail to be moved by such a huge favor bestowed in exchange for such an ugly betrayal? I am a wicked person. I can't believe that my heart doesn't shatter as I write this. Thank you, my beloved, for this gift of crying. I return these small tears now as some kind of repayment for all the ways I have betrayed you. I know that the well from which I draw them is less than pure, because I have so often refused your divine blessings and chosen evil instead. But please, my Lord, honor my tears. Cleanse this muddy water so that I do not tempt others to judge me as I have so often judged others. I used to wonder why you would ignore some very holy souls who have always worked so hard to serve you, who have been deeply religious their whole lives, and instead bestow your blessings on people like me who are religious in name only. Now I see, my only good, that you withhold their reward to give it to them all at once. They are strong enough to serve you without attachment to the fruits of their actions, and so you treat them as brave souls who are free from self-interest. I, on the other hand, am weak, and I need to taste your favors here on earth. Still, my beloved, you know that I often called out to you to forgive the people who criticized me because they seemed justified in their judgments. This impulse arose during that time when you, in your great goodness, were helping me to learn not to offend you. I was trying to give up all the things I thought might displease you, and you responded, my beloved Lord, by beginning to open your treasure box to your servant. It seemed like you had simply been waiting for me to be ready to receive your divine jewels. Soon, you were not only giving them to me, but letting other people know that you had given them to me. No matter how obvious my wickedness, some people didn't realize how wretched I was, and they began to put me on a pedestal when they found out about these divine favors. This was quickly followed by a wave of criticism and persecution from another faction. I was more inclined to agree with the second group, so I didn't blame anyone for blaming me. In fact, I implored you, my God, to recognize how right they were. Here are some of the things they were saying about me. She's trying to make herself out to be a saint. She's introducing innovations without even having managed to comply with the observance of her own monastic rule. She is nowhere near as good and holy as the other sisters in her house. I must admit I don't believe I will ever attain goodness unless God himself gives it to me from his own goodness. She's actually detracting from the goodness of our community by replacing perfectly good customs with bad ones. At least she is trying her best to convey these negative teachings, and she's capable of causing terrible damage. I'm not saying it was only my sisters who participated in the slander. There were other people, too. But those who accused me were innocent. They taught me things about myself. These must have been true things because it was you, Lord, who permitted them. Once, in the midst of this persecution, I was reciting the hours, and I came to this verse. You are righteous, O Lord, and your judgments are upright. What a great truth, I thought. For the spirit of evil has never had the power to tempt me to doubt that you, my God, embody every good thing, or to question a single article of faith. Rather, it seemed to me that the more my faith transcended the mundane world, the stronger it grew. This thought enkindled my devotion. When I reflected on your omnipotence, I recognized your power to shower me with your majestic gifts. I have never doubted this power, but I still could not help wondering why you would choose to hold your blessings back from so many souls who serve you so faithfully and yet give them so generously to someone like me. Then, my Lord, you answered me. Stop meddling, you said, and just serve me. This was the first time I ever heard your voice, and it scared me. Later, I will say more about these spiritual voices. It would only be another digression to elaborate on this topic now, and I have digressed more than enough already. I hardly know what I've said. How could it be otherwise? My readers are just going to have to put up with me. When I reflect on the patience with which God has treated me, and notice my present state, I am transported all over again. I lose the thread of what I've been saying and what I meant to say next. May I always be so foolish. May His Majesty never again grant me the power to offend Him in the slightest degree. May I be consumed in the fire of prayer. He has abundantly proven His mercy by forgiving me over and over again for the ingratitude I have shown Him. When St. Peter was ungrateful, the Lord pardoned him once, but He has pardoned me many times. No wonder the spirit of evil was able to slip in and tempt me. In public, I was pretending to be best friends with the one whom I was treating like the enemy in private. How blind I was! Where, my beloved, did I think I could find a remedy other than in you? What foolishness! I ran away from the light just to stumble through darkness. Such proud humility! The spirit of evil convinced me to release my hold on the pillar and the staff that supported me and kept me from falling. I am making the sign of the cross as I write this. I don't think I ever passed through any danger as grave as the one in which the spirit of evil lured me away from prayer under the twisted pretext of humility. It made me question how someone as wicked as I could dare to approach God in this way. Wasn't it enough for me to recite the obligatory vocal prayers like everyone else? I didn't even do that well. To attempt to engage in silent communion with God, the spirit of evil suggested was to display a severe lack of reverence and appreciation for all the favors God had shown me. It was right to think about these things and try to understand them, but it was very wrong to use it as an excuse to give up the practice of prayer. May you be blessed, Lord, who came to my rescue. It seems to me that this is the same way Judas was tempted, although the traitor did not tempt me quite as openly. Instead, what he did to Judas in one moment, he did to me little by little. For the love of God, let all who practice prayer be on the lookout for such deception. Know that my life was an utter mess when it didn't have prayer in it. What a fine remedy the spirit of evil offered me. What pretty humility. And what terrible agitation. But how could my soul be calm? It was drifting further and further from its true quiet. When I remembered the blessings and mercies I had received, the pleasures of the world looked disgusting to me. I am astonished that I could endure this. It was only hope that enabled me to go on. I'm not sure exactly what I was thinking at this time. After all, it was more than 20 years ago. But I do recall that I never abandoned my determination to resume the practice of prayer eventually. I was just waiting for the day when I would be free from sin. Oh, how far astray this hope led me. The spirit of evil would have gladly kept me hoping till Judgment Day and then delivered me straight to hell. The practice of prayer and spiritual reading revealed the truth about the bad road I was following. But even though I beseeched the Lord with copious tears, it was no use. I was too wicked. There I was, separated from prayer, amusing myself with trivial activities, exposed to 1,000 opportunities to miss the mark, and with little help in sight. No help, actually, except for help in sinning. What else could I possibly expect besides what happened to me as a result of these conditions? A certain Dominican friar named Vicente Barron deserves the credit for waking me from this sleep. He is a learned man and worthy in the sight of God. He made me receive communion every 2 weeks, and I began to return to my senses. I became less and less attached to my wicked ways, although I didn't entirely stop offending God. Since I had not lost the path altogether, however, I picked up my progress and slowly, gradually advanced, repeatedly stumbling and picking myself up again. Anyone who does not fail to keep walking will eventually arrive at his destination, even if he's a little late. Giving up on prayer is the same thing as losing your way. May God, being who He is, liberate us. For the love of God, pay close attention to my example and learn from it. It should be obvious from this account that a soul may attain a state in which God grants her indescribable blessings, and she can still fall. She needs to avoid placing herself in precarious positions. She should not trust herself. Reflect deeply on this. It is very important. Even though a favor definitively comes from God, the spirit of evil can deceive the soul afterward, harvesting as much benefit from this gift for itself as it possibly can. It uses what it steals from us to hurt us. If we have not grown strong in the virtues and have not cultivated sufficient detachment from the world, we are vulnerable to these tricks. No matter how powerful our resolutions are, we may be too weak to stand up to these dangers. This is an excellent teaching. It's not mine, but God's. I would like to share it with ignorant people like myself. Even if a soul finds herself in an exalted state, she must not trust herself to enter into battle, because she may not be equipped to defend herself. We need armor to protect ourselves against the spirit of evil. Souls at this stage have not yet developed the strength they need to fight against these wicked energies and stomp them out. The soul clearly perceives the difference between worldly and divine things. She sees herself very close to God and experiences His love for her. This love inspires confidence, and the soul is certain that she could never lose the blessing she is enjoying. The divine reward is so clear, even in this lifetime, that she could not imagine trading something so sublime and pure for anything as crude and impure as earthly pleasure. This is how the spirit of evil tricks her. It uses her confidence to rob her of humility. That's when the soul gets into trouble. She believes that she has nothing left to fear in herself, and so she places herself directly in the path of danger and begins to give away her fruits with wild abandon. This ardor does not come from pride. The soul understands perfectly that she can do nothing by herself. Her generosity springs from unconditional confidence in God, but she lacks discretion. She doesn't notice that she's still a fledgling. She can leave the nest. God can take her out. But she is not yet ready to fly. The virtues are not fully developed, and she has not had enough experience to recognize danger. She doesn't know what harm can come from too much trust in oneself. This is what destroyed me. Because of the peril of overconfidence, we need to fall back on the counsel of a spiritual director. There are also many other reasons to engage in conversations with spiritual people. I truly believe that once God has lifted a soul to this height, He will never cease blessing her unless she totally abandons Him. But when she falls, she must be extremely careful not to use this as an excuse to give up on prayer. This is how the devil tricked me, in the guise of false humility. I know I have said this already, and I would like to repeat it many more times. The goodness of God is greater than all the evils of which we are capable. Let the soul rely exclusively on this goodness. We may be well aware of who we are and of all the favors God has bestowed on us as punishment for our wicked deeds. But the moment we wish to renew our friendship with Him, God forgets our ingratitude. In fact, our transgressions make Him all the more inclined to forgive us. We are, after all, members of His family. We have already eaten His bread. Remember the word of God. Ponder what He has done for me. His Majesty began to forgive me long before I grew tired of forsaking Him. He never grows weary of giving. His mercies are inexhaustible. Let us never grow tired of receiving them. May He be forever blessed. Amen. And may all things praise Him. Chapter 16. The Stream of Holy Madness.